Today, I stand at my own funeral. People are crying the coffin's been lowered. But I, Edward Langston, am still alive, hiding in the shadows, watching my wife and kids say goodbye. Everything they see is just a perfectly staged act. Why did I have to fake my death, and who really wanted to bury me alive? But before we go any further, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're listening from in the comments below. I never thought I'd have to stand there, watching my wife and kids bury a fake body with my name on it. But that morning, when the smoke still rose from the ashes of the old library, I knew something darker had survived that fire. I'm Edward Langston, 70 years old. I thought I'd lived a quiet, full life in this small town called Maplewood. Yet within days, I'd become a dead man, and my two sons, Thomas and David, turned into mourners, faking their grief at their father's grave. I hid behind the trees at the edge of the cemetery, watching a funeral so cold, so empty. No neighbors, no old co-workers from the library, just my wife Grace, thin trembling, clutching a bouquet of white daisies. Thomas wore an expensive black suit, his face blank as if he were at a business meeting. And David, the boy who once followed me everywhere as a child, kept his head down, eyes on his phone, barely present. I wanted to rush out to scream that I was still alive. But then I remembered the note I'd found tucked into my pocket when I woke up among the ashes. Don't show yourself. They think you're dead. If you want to know who's behind this, stay quiet. Watch. So I did. I stayed quiet, and I watched. When the coffin was lowered, Grace collapsed. Thomas caught her quickly, eyes darting around like a man afraid of being seen. That wasn't the look of a grieving son. It was the look of someone with something to hide. Just then, Grace's phone buzzed. She opened it and froze. The message read, "I'm still alive. Don't trust them, and don't trust our sons." Her face went pale. The phone slipped from her hand. Thomas stepped forward, picked it up, scrolled fast, then deleted something. It all happened so quickly. But I knew the real nightmare had just begun. That evening after the funeral, I followed them home. The wooden house where I'd lived for more than 40 years looked strange now. The door freshly painted, a for sale sign swinging on the porch. Inside, the family photos were gone, replaced by cheap framed prints. From across the street, hidden in the dark, I watched Thomas pour himself a drink, his voice smooth, almost cheerful. "It's done. I'll call the insurance company tomorrow. They said the payout comes this week. After that, we'll sell the house." Grace turned to him, tears falling. "What are you saying? Thomas, your father's funeral was just yesterday." Thomas gave a cold smile. "Mom, Dad was old. At least what's left will help you live comfortably. We have to be realistic." Realistic. Such a cold word. I once taught my sons to love, to be grateful, to show respect. Now they use realistic to hide their greed. That night, I found shelter in an abandoned shed near the woods. A dim oil lamp flickered against the cracked wall. I took from my coat a half-burned photo, me, Grace, Thomas, and David standing in front of the library last Christmas. Thomas had said, "Dad, someday I'll rebuild this place. Bigger, brighter." I believed him. But now, he's the one who burned it all down, the library and our family. 2 days later, I went back to the site. Only the blackened concrete foundation remained. The police had sealed it off, but there was no sign of real investigation. No burn marks spreading outward, no damaged wiring that fire didn't come from an accident. In the corner, I found a melted plastic canister, the sharp smell of chemicals still clinging to it. I used to work in supply storage. I knew exactly what it was. A slow-burning compound used for fire testing. Someone had poured it around the library. That night I hid again in the cemetery, staring at my new gravestone, Edward Langston, 1953-2023, a devoted and loving father. Devoted, loving, and betrayed. Someone wanted to erase me not just from life but from memory. And I knew the only people who gained anything from my death were Thomas and David. From afar, I looked toward the house where the lights still burned. Two figures sat in the living room. Everything seemed calm, peaceful, but inside me the real fire had just begun to rise. I'm not dead, and if they wanted to bury me alive, I'll make them dig their own graves instead. I used to believe nothing was stronger than family, but sitting alone in that damp, moldy shed, listening to the rain hit the broken tin roof, I finally understood the most fragile thing in this world isn't glass, it's trust. Ever since the day I died, old memories keep flooding back. Maybe to understand why my sons became strangers. I have to start from the past, from the years I once thought were peaceful. I met Grace in the fall of 1976 when I was a librarian at Maplewood High. She was graceful, gentle, with a voice I could listen to for hours. We married quickly in a small backyard ceremony behind the church. We didn't have much, but we had laughter, love, and hope. When Thomas was born, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. He was bright, curious, with his mother's shining eyes. Then came David 3 years later, quiet, thoughtful, the kind of boy who ran to me whenever he was scared. Life felt complete. Until Thomas became a teenager. I still remember the first night he ever talked back to me. He wanted a new computer. Said he didn't want to fall behind his friends. I told him, "Not yet, son. We still have to pay for your mother's medicine." Thomas slammed his notebook on the table and shouted, "You're always poor. I don't want to end up like you." I went silent, stared at him, feeling as if a knife had been driven straight into my chest. I thought it was just teenage anger, but over the years, those words became his guiding truth. When Thomas went to college, he chose business, only coming home for holidays. Each visit, he'd talk about investments, shares, profit margins. David stayed behind, learned electrical work, lived simply, like me. I thought at least I still had one son with a good heart, but I was wrong. Behind David's eyes, there was always that flicker, half fear, half obedience every time his brother spoke. When I turned 69, Grace got pneumonia, spent 2 months in the hospital. I sold a small piece of land at the edge of town to pay the bills. That day, Thomas came home, looked around the house, and said coldly, "Dad, this place is too old. If you and Mom sell it, I can help you move into a nice apartment downtown. You'll be safer closer to me." I looked into his eyes, saw no concern there, only calculation. I refused. Thomas said nothing more, but there was a faint smile on his lips, like he'd already expected that answer. A few weeks later, he sent me new insurance papers, said they were just in case. When I read them, I noticed the life insurance had jumped from $20,000 to $80,000, with Thomas and David as the main beneficiaries. I hesitated, but Grace said, "Just sign it, honey. We might need it someday." So I did, never realizing that signature would become my death warrant. A month before the fire, Thomas came home again, this time with his wife Claudia. She was dressed elegantly, but her eyes looked around our wooden house with thinly veiled disdain. At dinner, she said, "Uncle Edward, if you're willing to sell this house, I know someone who'll buy it right away. They're offering over $90,000. I smiled gently. "This house isn't worth as much as the memories we built here." Claudia smirked. "Memories don't pay the electric bill, do they?" Thomas said nothing, but I saw his hand clench the glass so tightly his knuckles went white. After they left, Grace asked softly, "Do you think our son's changed?" I just nodded, but deep inside a cold feeling crept in. Maybe I'd lost them long ago. I just hadn't wanted to see it. In the days that followed, Thomas called me more often. Every time the same questions, "Dad. What time do you leave work? Where do you eat breakfast? Anyone else working late with you?" When I asked why, he just laughed. "Just making sure you're okay." But his tone, it was the sound of someone taking notes, not a son checking on his father. I told Grace about it. She laughed, said I was overthinking. I wanted to believe her, until one night I saw David at a cafe near the library. He was speaking to a man I'd never seen before, his voice low but clear. "As long as Dad leaves the library late, my brother will handle the rest." I started toward them, but they were gone before I could call his name. That sentence haunted me all night. Now, sitting here in the dark, I can finally see it all. Every piece fits the insurance papers, the phone calls, the concern. The fire wasn't an accident, and my death was only the first act of a carefully planned play. They didn't just want money, they wanted me gone, forever. But they made one fatal mistake. I'm still alive, and this time, I won't stay silent. I can't remember the exact moment I realized my own son wanted me dead. Maybe it was the night I heard the fire truck scream past, heading toward the library, the place I'd worked for over 40 years. All my life I believed in that library, in books and knowledge and my children. But that night, amid the flames, every bit of faith I ever had burned away. I still remember the smoke-thick chemical stinging my lungs. I didn't have time to think. There was an explosion. The world tilted. And then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a white room, an IV in my arm. A woman stood beside the bed. "You're awake," she said softly. "Don't be afraid. You're safe. My name is Nora." I tried to sit up, pain shooting through every part of me. She pressed a hand on my shoulder, calm but firm. "Mr. Langston, they think you died in the fire. And I suggest you let them think that." I stared at her, confused. Why, she handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a copy of a death certificate with my name on it. Signed by Thomas Langston, my son. I went cold all over. Nora explained she was a retired nurse working at a small private clinic. The night of the fire, a man had brought me in, unconscious, badly burned, saying I was a homeless man who'd been injured. He left a thick envelope, paid everything in cash, and told the doctor not to call the police. The name he gave was Michael Smith, Nora said. "But I recognized you from the Maplewood Hospital records. I knew who you were." I looked at her, suspicious but grateful. "And you saved me." She shook her head. "No. Whoever wanted you alive did that. I just helped keep you hidden a little longer. I stayed at that clinic for 2 days trying to recover. In that time, I heard news of my own funeral, quick, quiet, and cold. No investigation, no autopsy. Everything passed smoothly, too smoothly. I knew better than anyone my death had been scripted long before it happened. When I was strong enough, I slipped out of the clinic at night. Before I left, Nora pressed a small note into my hand. "If you need help," she said, "find this man, Samuel Reed." She told me he was a private investigator once with the police, now working alone. 2 days later, I found him. His office was in an old basement behind a cafe, the sign above half-rusted, reading only RD Investigations. Tall, lean, sharp eyes, a gravelly voice that sounded like he'd smoked through every secret in town. After I told him my story, Samuel sat quietly for a long time, then said, "Mr. Langston, if what you're saying is true, this wasn't an accident. This was organized murder, and the only ones with a motive are the beneficiaries." I nodded. We didn't need to say the names out loud. We both knew. Samuel began digging. The first thing he found, Thomas had withdrawn the entire insurance payout just 3 days after the funeral, claiming it was for funeral costs and support for his mother. The second, David, the one I'd believed still had a conscience, was the one who signed the death verification. And the third, there was no official record of the fire at the library. No file, no report, meaning the incident was never logged as a public accident. One fire with no record, one death with no body. "One heir who moved too fast," Samuel said. "What do you think I think?" I answered slowly. They wanted me gone. We went back to the ruins together. The library was just ashes, but something was off. The inner walls were untouched, no cracks from the heat. That could only mean one thing: the fire had been controlled, burned from the outside and using a slow-burning solvent. In the corner, Samuel picked up a half-melted metal can, the label still clinging, laboratory-grade ethanol. He frowned. "This stuff's only sold to certified labs. No one in Maplewood can buy it without special clearance. Unless someone used the library's credentials," I finished. That night, Samuel took me to a small roadside motel. He told me to lay low. I sat there in the dark, listening to the wind through the cracked window, thinking of Grace. She was probably drowning in grief, believing her husband was gone, while the men who killed me were there beside her, whispering comfort through lies. The next morning, Samuel sent a thick envelope to my room. Inside were photos Thomas walking out of Maplewood Bank, envelope in hand. Attached was a transfer receipt to an account named Claudia Langston, his wife. At the bottom, Samuel's note. The amount matches the life insurance payout exactly. I stared at those words for a long time, until my hands began to shake. There was no room left for doubt. My son, the boy who once held my hand and learned to read in the library, had murdered me with fire and called it a plan. But what he didn't know was that I was still breathing. And when a father betrayed still walks this earth, he'll do whatever it takes to reclaim justice for himself and for the ashes of the love they burned to the ground. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Thomas's face flickering in the fire, those cold, fearless eyes. I used to think nothing could break a father more than losing his child. But I was wrong. What's worse is realizing your own child wanted you dead. Samuel was right. If you keep hiding, he said, they'll spend that money in peace, and you'll fade into a ghost story. You can't just survive, Mr. Langston. You have to exist to prove the truth. I nodded. From that moment on, I knew I couldn't just be a victim. I had to become the hunter. We started with the smallest traces. Samuel had a contact inside the local bank and managed to pull Thomas's transaction records. Within 2 weeks after my funeral, he'd moved over $60,000 split between 3 accounts, all under Claudia's relatives' names. The rest he withdrew in cash. Not a single cent went to my wife, Grace. Samuel looked at me, his voice low. This isn't just insurance fraud. I think they're laundering money. Or funding something bigger. I clenched my fist. Bigger, I said quietly. Nothing's bigger than selling your soul to kill your father. Meanwhile, Samuel started tracking David. The quiet boy who once avoided trouble now spent his nights in bars and at an abandoned warehouse on the industrial edge of town. One night, Samuel planted a recorder under the table, where David often met a man in a leather jacket. When we played it back, I could barely breathe. David's voice shook. Thomas said, the money's coming next week. I can't take this anymore. I never wanted our father to die. But it's out of control now. A pause. Then the other man, rough voice steady, said, You signed the papers, kid. Now live with it. Samuel stopped the tape. Now we know who's cracking, he said. If there's any conscience left, it's in David. He's our way in. 3 days later, I sent David an anonymous letter typed no name. I know what happened at the library. I know who planned it. If you want redemption, meet me at the old Maplewood Bridge, 10 p.m. Rain fell in soft sheets that night. I waited beneath the wooden bridge, the river murmuring below, keeping time with my heartbeat. Right on the hour, David appeared. He froze when he saw me trembling, not from fear of a ghost, but fear of the truth. Dad. Oh my God. You're alive, I nodded. And you still have a chance to save yourself if you tell me everything. Tears mixed with rain as he spoke, broken, desperate. Thomas had fallen deep into debt with a shadow investment firm. His life was on the line. It was Claudia who suggested the plan to stage a fire, collect the insurance, and start fresh. David was forced to play along to sign the death report to keep it quiet. I didn't think you'd really die, he sobbed. I thought it was just a setup, a scare. I said nothing for a long time. Under the dim yellow light, I looked at my youngest son, the boy who once feared the dark, now terrified of his own guilt. I placed a hand on his shoulder. No one can erase their sins, son, but we can make sure the guilty pay for them. The next night, Samuel planted a hidden recorder in Thomas's new office. He'd started a small brokerage firm in town, a shiny front for his lies. We waited days, until we finally caught what we needed. Claudia, relax. The money's split already. Your mom's got nothing and your dad's gone for good. Who would have thought he'd go down so easy? Thomas. Don't mention him again. I buried that part of my life. That was it. Enough. I looked at Samuel, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. I'm done hiding. I want to face him. He tried to calm me, but I didn't listen. That evening, I disguised myself as a worker and slipped into Thomas's company launch event. Lights sparkled, guests laughed, and there he stood, my son glowing like some self-made hero. I watched from the shadows as he spoke about success, about overcoming family loss. Each word cut deeper than the last. When the crowd began to leave, I stepped out of the darkness. He turned and froze. His face went pale, eyes wide with disbelief. "Dad, no, this can't be." I met his gaze, steady voice, low but sharp as glass. "You burned the library. You buried your father. Now, you'll bury yourself in the truth." The room went silent. He turned and ran, but I knew from that moment on everything he'd built was already collapsing. Samuel and I had set the trap, and as the storm rolled in outside, I finally understood. This was no longer about survival. This was justice. The moment Thomas turned and ran from that party, I knew there was no turning back. The look on his face when he saw me, the man he thought was dead, wasn't just fear. It was the horror of someone realizing he'd finally come face to face with the one thing he could never escape. I didn't chase him. Samuel once told me justice doesn't always need to rush. Let guilt find its own light. And he was right. 3 days later, the police raided Thomas and Claudia's house. Both were arrested, suspected of insurance fraud and staging a fake fire. Samuel had turned over everything, the audio recordings, the bank transfers, and most damning of all, the video of me walking into Thomas's event. This, Samuel told the detective, is the man they claimed was dead. I didn't want to see Grace right away. I was afraid. Afraid of her eyes, of the pain that would live there, torn between truth and hell itself. But the police needed my statement, and I had no choice. When I entered the room, Grace was there, thinner, grayer, her eyes red and tired. She looked at me for a long moment, then broke down sobbing. "Edward, my God, you're really alive." I stepped closer, took her trembling hands. My voice cracked. "I'm sorry, but if I hadn't faked my death, we'd never have seen who they really were." Grace shook her head, tears streaming. "I saw them changing, Edward. But I thought they were just lost. I never believed they could go this far." I held her hands tighter, whispered, "Sometimes we have to let truth do what love can't." The trial began 2 months later. Maplewood had never seen anything like it. The courtroom was packed. Friends, neighbors, faces from decades past. When they called my name, every head turned toward the man who came back from the dead. Thomas was led in wearing prison gray, his face hollow. Claudia stayed cold and composed. But David, his eyes were wet, unable to meet mine. When the prosecutor played the recording, Thomas's voice saying, "Don't mention him again. I buried that part of my life." The entire room fell silent. I heard Grace's soft sob beside me. When it was my turn to speak, I rose. My voice was calm but heavy as stone. I didn't come here for revenge. I came to remind them that some things, no matter how deep you bury them, always find their way back. Just like the truth. That afternoon, the verdict was read. Thomas Langston, life imprisonment for attempted murder and insurance fraud. Claudia, 15 years. David, reduced sentence for cooperating with the police. As they were led away, Thomas turned to me, eyes burning red. "You won, Dad, but you lost everything." I looked back silent. Because he was right. There was no victory here, only ashes. A month later, a letter arrived from the prison. It was from David. The handwriting was rough, uneven. "I know I've done wrong. I don't ask for forgiveness. But please know, I still remember those nights you read to me at the library. I remember the smell of the books, and I remember you. I read that letter over and over. Finally, I went to see him. In the small visitation room, David sat quietly, head down. When he saw me, he broke into tears. I said nothing. I just placed my hand on his shoulder. You killed your father, I whispered. But I'm still your dad. I left the prison in the rain. My heart lighter though sorrow still lingered, part forgiveness, part exhaustion. 3 years passed. I live again in our old wooden house, repaired roof, white walls. Grace is still with me, though her health fades. Together we built the Lantern Light Foundation for the elderly betrayed or abandoned by their own families. I used what little money was left from the insurance payout to start it, a way to light one last flame for what remains of my life. Sometimes I walk past the old library. All that's left is the foundation, a few broken bricks. I kneel, place a white daisy on the ground, and close my eyes. In the soft breeze, I swear I hear a child's voice whisper, "Dad, read one more chapter." I smile. Maybe it's only memory echoing back, but at least now I know the fire that once consumed me could never burn away the only thing left standing, the truth. And as I walk away, I murmur to myself, justice doesn't give back what we've lost, but it lets us face the past without bowing our heads. If you've made it this far, maybe you've felt it too. The pain of a father betrayed, yet still choosing forgiveness, just to find a little peace. The story of Edward Langston isn't just a tragedy. It's a reminder that the truth always finds its way back, no matter how deep it's buried. If my story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe so I can keep bringing you more stories like this. Thank you for listening.